On the night of August 31st, 1985, a massive chase was taking place on the streets of Los Angeles. A man trying to escape the crowds and the police was finally cornered by the river. The man who had terrorized Los Angeles had finally been caught. He was silently looking left and right, trying to understand what was going to happen to him. But what made this man so frightening? What were his crimes? In the rest of the video, you can get to know this horrible criminal better. And if you don't want to miss stories like this, don't forget to subscribe now. Richard was born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, northeast of Los Angeles. His family was made up of Mexican immigrants, and childhood was shaped by family hardship and violence. His father, Julian, was often violent towards his family and grew up in this fearful environment. Although his mother worked hard to provide for the family, she was unable to create a safe environment for Richard. As a child, Richard's life was full of traumas. The difficulties in the house he moved into with his mother led him to an inner loneliness. At a young age, he started spending time on the streets and met gangs. Here, he met gangs that were involved in the criminal world. His time with gangs offered him a new path in his search for power and identity. This dark environment deepened his relationship with violence and crime and caused him to project his inner rage outward. Especially during this period, he was introduced to crime at a young age, and committing crimes seemed like a form of independence. But what really impressed him was getting to know his Uncle Mike. Mike seemed like a hero to Richard, because Mike was a veteran of the Vietnam War, and he was constantly telling Richard about the violence and abuses he had suffered in that war. Every detail he told him caused different desires to arise in Richard. The violence he witnessed as a teenager, his use of LSD, and his interest in Satanism caused his mind to become very confused. His substance use disconnected him from reality and led him to darker thoughts. The turmoil in his mind led him to a new interest, Satanism. His interest in Satanism deepened his anger and rebellion and pushed him to sever his emotional ties to humanity. As he grew older, his sexual fantasies began to include violent themes such as imprisonment and rape. At the age of 22, moved to California, where he settled permanently. The beginning of Richard's criminal career dates back to 1984. His first victim was Jenny Vinco, who died in Los Angeles on June 9, 1984. Vinco was 79 years old and was brutally attacked inside her home, broke into her home, killed her, and then sexually assaulted her. It was the first major sign of criminal behavior, secrecy, and violence. Crimes continued, often with similar methods. In 1984 and 1985, he targeted several different victims. Towards the end of 1984, on August 25th, elderly women named Mary Louise Cannon, 75, and Leona L. Hayes, 68, became his victims, killed both women, targeting them for burglary and sexual assault. Both women were attacked while sleeping in their homes. The next major incident took place on March 17, 1985. An attack at the home of William and Lillian Doy showed that had taken his violence a step further, killed Lillian, 66, and seriously wounded William, the man of the house. What was striking about the incident was sadistic attacks on his victims, with the aim of creating fear inside the house. The violence and sadism inflicted on his victims became the hallmark of his crimes. By the summer of 1985, the severity of his crimes increased. His September 1985 crime against a 34-year-old woman named Dale Okazaki was another example of sadistic nature. Okazaki was shot after approaching car and died soon after. Not only brought death to his victims, but also put them in a state of great fear. Shortly after this incident, on September 28th, Billy Joe 66 and Barbara Ann 46 suffered another attack, this time aimed to create fear and terror by murdering his victims in their homes. Because he loved to create fear in the eyes of his victims, he would often torture them and then kill them. Diversified his crimes, most commonly using handguns and knives. He entered the homes of his victims, usually tied them up, sexually assaulted them, and then often killed them. In late 1985, Sally 23 and George 31 became targets. Although Sally was victim, she managed to escape death. That night, continued to persecute his victims, and after taking the lives of several of them, he quickly fled. Later, in Ijobawu, crimes became increasingly horrific. Young victims, such as James Romero Jr. 13 and Sarah Romero 19, also fell victim to his attacks. As violent crimes increased, the pressure and assaults on his victims became more sophisticated. He aimed to kill his victims with knives, guns, and sometimes just physical violence. Towards the end of 1985, Richard's crimes began to attract more and more attention. He was now committing his crimes with greater boldness, and the number of victims increased rapidly. In November 1985, he chose a couple, Maria Hernandez 22 and Heriberto Hernandez 34, as his victims. Entered the Hernandez home and shot them, but Maria miraculously survived. Heriberto died. Maria recognized face, and this was an important step that would begin the path to his capture. Then, in December 1985, he targeted the couple Vincent Zatzara 64 and Maxine Zatzara 44, entered the Zatzara home, violently attacked and killed both of his victims. In this case, severely damaged the bodies of his victims and left many bloody scars. His crimes were no longer just brutal murders, but horrific torture. Crimes quickly spread far and wide, creating great fear among the people of Los Angeles. Most people knew him as the Midnight Killer, or the Night Stalker, although was more careful as he continued his crimes. A mistake in September 1985 put him on the police radar. The police investigations into crimes caused a wave of anxiety and fear throughout Los Angeles. In the end, however, capture was a coincidence. At the end of 1985, a witness in San Francisco noticed Carr and informed the police. When the police checked the license plates of the vehicle, they found information that matched Richard's name, but arrest was a complete coincidence. In July 1985, because of his crimes in Los Angeles, the public was very curious about the identity of the killer. However, made one last big mistake. While shopping in a department store, an employee noticed him and, suspicious, called the police. The employee noticed that was behaving in a manner similar to the criminal reports about him. The police moved quickly to arrest, and he was eventually arrested on August 31, 1985. He initially denied the crime, but later admitted his crimes during interrogations. The severity of his crimes in court attracted a great deal of media and public attention. In 1989, he was found guilty of 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 thefts. The sentence was clear: the death penalty. His demeanor in the courtroom, his composure, and his frequent declarations of his devotion to the devil have caused deep public horror and revulsion. Ramirez showed no remorse for his crimes, saying during the trial, "Satan is my companion." He was also remembered for his cold smile, with a callous disregard for the suffering of the victims' families. Despite being sentenced to death, Richard Ramirez spent 23 years in San Quentin prison awaiting execution. In 2013, before his execution, he died in prison of lymphoma. His death created mixed emotions among the families of his victims. Some felt that he had not served his full sentence, while others said that his death was finally a form of justice. In conclusion, the story of Richard Ramirez reveals that a figure who created fear and chaos in society is, even in the end, remembered with controversy. However, his dark past makes the memories of his victims all the more haunting, and sheds light on the lessons that must be learned to prevent such criminals from ever appearing again. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts with us in the comments so you don't miss our new stories. See you again soon.